Manuel Pastor, let me tell you a little bit about him. He's a professor of sociology and American studies and ethnicity here at USC. He currently directs the program for environmental and regional equity and the Center for Study of Immigrant Integration. He holds the Turpanjian Chair of Civil Society and Social Change. He's been doing work for many years on movement building and the economic, environmental, and social conditions facing low-income communities. Manuel Pastor, please join us. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing people to order. And in particular, because sometimes my voice doesn't work so well, so I appreciate that. Some people have a bad hair day. I can have a bad voice day. I'm pleased to introduce Councilman Marqueece Harris-Dawson. And I have a whole bio in front of me about his achievements, having been President and CEO of Community Coalition, having been elected to the LA City Council in 2015, having been one of the leaders and champions for a $2 billion bond in homelessness in Los Angeles. But let me throw that bio to one side and say instead the following. Sometimes in the course of your life, you have a chance to meet someone remarkable when they're on their way up. I've been lucky enough to do that with several folks. There's a MacArthur Prize winner, Ai-jen Poo. I like to say that I met Ai-jen Poo before she was Ai-jen Poo. I think I met Marqueece Harris-Dawson before he was Marqueece Harris-Dawson. It was about 10 years ago while he was just beginning to direct Community Coalition. But as I learned more about Marqueece, what I realized is that his trajectory is a trajectory that marks really the trajectory of Los Angeles. Here's a young man when I met him. He's much older now. Who, along with his family, wound up leaving South Los Angeles, at least for a while, because of the ways in which deindustrialization, excessive crime, and the scourge of over-policing chased away so many families. But he, like so many others, came to the realization, particularly after the Los Angeles Civil Unrest, that South LA was the place where the work really needed to happen, where the alliances could be formed and the future could be forged for a better Los Angeles. And like many others, in the wake of the unrest, he came to the profound recognition that what was required was a vision for equity, a real plan about how to create opportunities for people, a willingness to build bridges, particularly between the rapidly changing Black and brown communities of South LA. And this has been a hallmark of what Community Coalition has done. You saw Alberto Retana here earlier. Marqueece, Karen Bass were doing it as they were adding Community Coalition as well. And also a commitment to an inside-outside game. Realizing that you needed to run people for political office, but that had to be coupled with community organizing that could lift the tough issues and create the conditions for political figures to be honest. But at the same time, the community organizers had to be willing to run for those political offices and take up the task of implementation. So this was a recognition on the part of people like Marqueece, but around him was a recognition that what needed to happen for that to become widespread in Los Angeles was the creation of a new generation of thoughtful, progressive, forward-looking leaders who could understand the root causes that led to the riots, who would not let that become a template for despair, but instead a template for rebuilding, and who understand that there was a profound link between what needed to happen socially and at a community level and what needed to happen with the built environment. The placemaking that this conference is about. So this is who Marqueece is. This is what you're about to hear from. I'm glad I got to know him on his way up, because soon he's going to be sort of stratospheric and no longer calling the little people. But he is one of the smartest, most capable, most forward-looking folks I've had the pleasure to get to know. Spent a lot of time talking with him, and what I've realized is that when you're with Marqueece, you might be talking about the 13th chapter of Tom Piketty's Capital, dissecting a book very few Americans read, but everybody talked about. You might be trying to understand the nuances and vagary of contemporary politics, or you might just be digging deep into the stanzas of the new Kendrick Lamar album, which is actually his probably favorite topic. But what we have with Marqueece Harris-Dawson is exactly that new generation of new, capable, forward-looking leaders. You're catching him as he's a city councilman, but you might be catching him on his way up to other great things. My good friend, Marqueece Harris-Dawson.
Wow, one more time for the one and only Professor Manuel Pastor. It's a very endearing introduction that I truly, truly appreciate, and puts just a little bit of pressure on the comments that I'll make here this afternoon, so thank you for that. Folks may or may not know that Manuel is my workout partner, and we lift weights across the street on campus, and occasionally, as we're working out, we'll get into a flow, and Manuel will throw an extra weight on the dumbbell for us to lift. And so I feel like that's what you did today. You just threw an extra weight on the pressure for this speech. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. I know you're in a hotel and the lights are dim and there are no windows and it's kind of kickback, but we want to have a little bit of energy. This week has been a tumultuous week. This week has been on my calendar for a long time, and there's been a lot of events. But there's something about this time, and I would love to hear if people have gone through this like I have. There's something about the 25th commemoration of the Civil Unrest that has been emotionally draining. Explaining the stories over and over again, having to place yourself back in that time, and really put yourself in the position to tell the story and to think about how you felt and remember all the facts. And one reason that happens is because the further away I think we get from the civil unrest, the more simple people try to make it, right? So it goes from being what it really was in 1992, really a rainbow rebellion, to a black, white, Korean affair. It goes from being about the economy and housing and jobs and the industrial sector and the war on drugs and substance abuse and gang violence to being simply about the one beating on the side of the road and the one video and the one verdict. And when people ask you where you were and what happened and whether or not you think it'll happen again and can you compare that time to now, it's emotionally draining, because what I remember most about 1992 and leading up to it is the amount of anger, frustration, and despair that you would feel on a routine basis, whether it was the shooting of Latasha Harlins, which is one of those things that I think doesn't get nearly enough attention in the discussion of the 1992 civil unrest. Folks have to remember, having video footage, remote video footage, was a new thing. So the rules about what you could show on TV and what you couldn't hadn't been made yet. And so literally every night, I don't know how long it was, Commissioner DuPont Walker, but for several months, every night we saw a girl tussle over a bottle of orange juice, place money on the counter, turn her back, and get shot in the head. Every night, over and over and over and over again. And then you'd have pundits come on TV and try to explain to you how it was the girl's fault that she got shot. And we went on from there, and then there was the verdict, and there was effectively an acquittal. There was no jail time for that homicide. And at the same time, we have gang violence that has grown out of control in the neighborhood. Young people are dying, half a dozen a weekend, 3 on a weeknight, back and forth, and there's no real response. Everybody knows we need more after-school programs and we need more programs for the youth. This is widely known and widely accepted, except no one's doing anything about it. The needle isn't moving at all. And then you put on top of that, and a whole bunch of other things that I'm not mentioning, the Rodney King beating on the side of the road, where we all said, finally, it's on camera. Now, you know, we're not in the, how many people saw the movie Get Out? Good. So you know how he goes into the sunken place? So the sunken place, it represents where a lot of African American people feel like no matter how loud you scream, no one's going to hear you, right? Because you're in this zone where you can't be heard and your experience can't be validated. So when the video came out, we said, wow, we're not in the sunken place anymore. Everybody can see it. And so the world has to acknowledge what happens here in LA and what has been being documented by the LA Sentinel and the Watts Time and every publication we've ever had since there have been publications in black people in Los Angeles. Now it has to be acknowledged. The Rodney King beating comes on TV in England and in China and in Japan and in Argentina, all over the entire world, and the world seems to agree this is kind of a bad deal. And then we get the verdict. And there's a little bit of tension, but only a short amount of time before the verdict gives way to what we now know as the civil unrest. I was not in Los Angeles at the time of the civil unrest. I was actually in Atlanta, Georgia, in college. We were ending our semester and preparing to come back home, and we're kind of watching TV, preparing for finals and writing our last papers. And you know, you'd see an intersection go up, and so you call your friend and you say, hey, Dave, you know, turn on the TV, your block just caught on fire, it's on Channel 7. And then another block would go up and you call someone else until there were about 50 of us in the top floor of Graves Hall at Morehouse College watching TV, watching our city go up in flames. I can tell you of the 50 of us there was not a single person who was the least bit surprised. The only surprise among most of us was that it wasn't broader, it wasn't deeper, and it wasn't longer. Because for many of us, this was the first physical expression of the anger and frustration and insult that we'd grown up feeling for as long as any of us could remember. I say that because, and tell that story because, again, the further and further away we get from it, those things get forgotten. Some of us on some parts of the political spectrum want to minimize it and say people just went wild and they saw an opportunity to get free stuff, so they took it. Other people on other sides of the political spectrum want to say, oh, well, people got fed up politically and they were about to mount a revolution. Not quite the case, but we say that. But that is, all of those things are a reduction of what people were going through in that moment after 1992. What 1992 did give us the opportunity to do, I think many of us, is to take a pause, think about what we wanted to do, if we wanted to engage this problem, or if we wanted to check out altogether. I will put this as a little footnote, and I'll ask the folks at Pure to take a look at it. Many people would argue that this is the time when black flight from the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles to the exurbs began in earnest. Because a lot of families just said, I can't anymore. We can't do this. Who knows when it's going to happen again? Who knows if anything is going to change? But then there were those who said, we're going to stay. There was the Don't Move, Improve movement and a host of others, and said, we're going to try to make this thing work for all of us. And in that time period is when you see what I think has been a renaissance, or what now is established as a renaissance of both civic engagement and community organizing. And I separate both those things. Civic engagement, I say on the broad scale, where everybody's involved. And so if you look at the work of California Calls in the interim between now and then, At the time that 1992 happened, we elected a Republican governor after that, right? Orange County was bright red as a county. Orange County used to routinely outvote South LA and LA County per capita. Over time, through civic engagement, and this is on a mass scale, all of that's flipped. Orange County's no longer red. Orange County no longer outvotes LA County. Orange County doesn't even outvote South LA anymore per capita. We have better per capita turnout in South LA than Orange County does as a whole because of the voter engagement work that folks have done. Folks joined organizations, and so we had something called the Empowerment Congress here in South LA, and don't let anybody tell you any different. The city of LA got the neighborhood council system from the Empowerment Congress in the 8th Council District in South LA. The Empowerment Congress almost went on steroids after 1992. So where there was limited involvement, there became broad-scale involvement. And there were conferences and annual gatherings where you'd see up to 1,000 people right here on the USC campus. And so that's the broad civic engagement that you see. People join churches, people join fraternities and sororities, and a whole host of other organizations that gave them the opportunity to be a part of making this place we call Los Angeles and making the community we call South LA. Then at a more granular level, there was organizing. And so there was the work at Scope around jobs and dignity for people on welfare and coming out of welfare. There was the work at the LA Alliance for a New Economy to fight for LA to be the first city to have a living wage and to set the stage for LA to be the first big city to pass $15 an hour as a minimum wage. There was the work of the Community Coalition to make sure city planning, especially the placement of sensitive uses like motels, like liquor stores, like recycling centers, like prisons even, were not concentrated among low-income people of color, and that everybody in Southern California bore the weight for those negative land uses or sensitive land uses. Those organizations really got going and got energy from people's responses to the 1992 civil unrest. Then those organizations were able to begin to play what we call the inside-outside game. So here and there, one person, there was a young union organizer, a Latino man that represented and was one of the lead organizers for one of the biggest African-American unions anywhere in the state of California or the country, decided to jump from being a labor organizer to being an elected official. His name was Antonio Villaraigosa. He became Speaker of the California Assembly and Mayor of the city of Los Angeles. The founder of the Community Coalition also left and ran for Assembly. She became Speaker of the Assembly, and now she represents Southern California in the United States Congress. And there's a host of other people. When I walk the halls at City Hall or Sacramento or the County Board of Supervisors or even Washington, it is uncommon for me not to run into a former organizer, a community organizer, a labor organizer, a faith leader, an environmental justice leader, and so on and so forth. And so what that does is it allows us to have a different kind of conversation about the future that we want to build. It isn't the same old polarizations that we've seen historically over these set of principles and these set of principles that argue with each other, sometimes in blindness to the material conditions that we see on the ground. And so now we sit here in Los Angeles after that renaissance and after that work is being done with some very serious challenges in front of us. Very serious challenges in front of us. I like to say that there are three things or three entities that we look at to evaluate what's happened since the civil unrest. First, we look at policing. Policing still has lots of problems in Los Angeles and beyond, but the LAPD is nothing like it was in 1992 or 82 or 72 or any time in its history. Before, we had a department where, for me and almost anybody I knew, there was no such thing as a good interaction between you and a police officer. And I wasn't somebody who was, should be having bad interactions with the police department, is how I'll say it. But there wasn't anything like a good interaction between anybody that was young, a person of color, especially if you were in South LA, and any member of the Los Angeles Police Department at any level. That isn't the case now. It is an organization that at that time used to have as a principle an edict against what we call community policing. So they actually had a rule that said, we don't want any police officer to be in an area so long where he or she gets to know the people that live in that neighborhood. That was their written, explicit policy. Now you have a department that embraces community policing at a lot of levels. And so the Community Safety Partnership in Jordan Downs and our housing projects nationally recognized a system that assigns police officers to a specific area, the housing projects in this case, for at least 5 years. Many of them stay longer than that because they get an attachment. Reduces violence, reduces crime, and reduces arrests, and reduces reports of police brutality altogether just by building relationships between police and community. I'm very proud to say that we are opening the first community safety partnership outside of a housing development in South LA in the Harvard Park neighborhood in the 8th and 9th Council districts starting this summer. So policing has changed, but policing has two parts to it. It has the person that you come in contact with on the street, and then it has the judicial system. The problem with the Rodney King case was most people acknowledged that the police hadn't done what they were supposed to do. Everybody expected the judicial system to do what it was supposed to do in the face of that, and we found that it failed, right? All of the same mechanisms that were in place to produce the Rodney King verdict, by the way, folks, are still in place today. You can still move a trial out. You can still go jury shopping, is what lawyers call it, right? You can still move around and try to find the jury of your choice, right? There are still lots of laws that advantage law enforcement and create a situation where even evidence that we know about, like the video footage from a police camera, cannot be used in a case involving a police officer. So a lot of those things are still in place. The other thing that is very scary is George Holliday, I think the guy's name was, probably had a camera that he had to sit on his shoulder and had to dip out of the window and film like this. Now everybody has this. So it's just any day that if there's any misconduct, we're very, very likely to see it on some social media or some major news outlet. And again, the question is, has the court system changed enough to accommodate that reality? Probably not, and probably there's still a lot of work to do. The second thing is the people, and so we've described people got involved, people started voting, people got engaged. We've done more cleanups in my community than I can count, and this is just a small measure. Every time we have a cleanup, people show up to help clean up their neighborhood for free on a Saturday afternoon or a Wednesday afternoon, and they ask us when the next one is going to be. So this is the kind of engagement and pride in South LA that you see. We're in the middle of something I'm very excited about, and I love seeing the artwork on the walls of the building here. We're in the middle of a mural renaissance in South LA, and so there's a group called Smile South Central and a whole bunch of other groups that are saying, you know what? This wall is old. We're not going to wait for the business to paint it. We're just going to paint a great piece of art on the wall. And you see all these springs of hope and springs of resilience floating up in South LA. And so we say that the people have changed. What has not changed and has been the most troubling and the stickiest is the financial sector. And so I see a lot of my neighbors from the 8th District who come to me and say, Marqueece, we want a supermarket. And I'm glad you got elected because we need a coffee shop. And I have to explain that, you know, the council gives me a lot of power. It does not give me the power to open up a grocery store. It does not. I can't call up Rouse and say, hey, get over here. We need a grocery store. I'm passing a motion to cause you to do that on next week's agenda. We can't do that. And so routinely what you see is the same redlining, the same benign neglect, the same unspoken implicit racism is still there, and it still rears its ugly head almost every time the issue of economic development and real estate development comes up in our community. On the flip side of that coin is because of the civic engagement that we have and because of the organizing that we've had, what people of Southern California have essentially said is, we're not going to wait on the banks, we're not going to wait on the corporations, we're not going to wait on the insurance companies or the investor class. We're going to rebuild Southern California on our own. And so we taxed ourselves to rebuild the transportation system. We're taxing ourselves to rebuild a housing system for very, very poor people, the poorest people that there are. We taxed ourselves to rebuild our community college system. We taxed ourselves to rebuild our park system. Right here in South LA, we're working on a very exciting project that will total in excess of $50 million called the River to Rail project. So that rail that runs along Slauson, right? We're working now to turn that into a world-class park, bikeway, and walkway. The people who do that work will be the people from our community. And so after a while, when we're done all that work, hopefully the banks and the insurance companies and all those other interests will say, hey, those are good people. We can do business with them and we can make some money with them. But I will end with this, and I think I agreed to take a couple questions if I haven't taken too much time talking. Southern California, Los Angeles, and South Los Angeles, I think, is a story of resilience and a story of what people can do when they decide to take their future into their own hands. We have, again, turned away from the situation that we saw in 1992, changed a lot of the key factors that we saw that led up to it, and are poised to change the ones that I would put in the category of unfinished business. So I encourage everybody as we do these commemorations, again, take a minute to tap into the emotional place that led up to 1992 and that was 1992, and draw on that energy to continue the fight going forward. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. A quick question around this placemaking. When we think about things like Columbus Day and replacing that with things like Indigenous Peoples Day and celebrating where we stand today on native land, talk a little bit about that, because I know there's conversations going on in the council.
That is directly connected to the civic engagement and the voter engagement that organizations have done over the years. So now you have a situation where the matter of whether or not we're going to keep Columbus Day and have Indigenous Peoples Day is not really a debate on the city council. There's one person on the city council that's kind of faintly raising an issue, and frankly it's because he kind of has to. So that's going to be done. What's also nice about our situation now is the conversation won't stop with the symbolic, because changing a holiday from one name to another is largely, it's important, but it's symbolic. This is also a situation where people actually ask, what is the condition of Native people in Los Angeles? And what's being done about that? Are they homeless? What is their housing situation? What is their educational situation? What is their situation regarding to health and transportation? And so, again, the circumstances we created now doesn't mean we can answer all those questions or improve those conditions now, but those questions get asked. And we've moved from let's eat together and kimchi and fried chicken to let's actually look at the well-being of our fellow citizens and neighbors.
Hi, good afternoon. As we talk about placemaking and the arts, I heard you mention about this proposed project along Slauson, which, in my opinion, actually holds some of LA's greatest graffiti and honors the legacy of some of our best writers. How do you plan on maintaining the integrity of our communities as arts and development come sweeping in?
Well, so I answer that a couple ways. I agree with you about the graffiti on the Slauson walk. I think one of the things we're working on in the 8th District, and I'm going to need all of you all's help with this, is as the train comes in on Crenshaw, the Metro, well, the part of it that is above ground from Slauson on the south to 48th on the north, really it's 60th on the south, we are instituting and now officially starting what we're going to call the Great Outdoor Urban Museum, which will feature some of our greatest muralists and graffiti artists anywhere in Southern California. We already know that Southern California is a place, if you follow graffiti and street art, Southern California is a place that people come to. People fly here from Germany to go look at those art pieces on Slauson that sometimes the government refers to as graffiti or vandalism. And so we want to try to curate that and put it in the place that it deserves and raise the level to museum status. So it's something that people come see, and they come see in an official way. The artists are lifted up and held up and for their work that they deserve. So we're absolutely going to do that.
Hello. Last night at Loyola Marymount, Councilmember, you talked a lot about the links between equity considerations and broader economic opportunity considerations, standing in solidarity across multiple groups. And that conversation veered toward housing a lot, and housing insecurity. This morning, Professor Myers shared the slide about the likelihood of future uprisings with respect to inequality. And I was wondering if you could comment more about where there is continuing tension, and whether to what extent housing insecurity is reaching a point for all of us that could spark future protest, future uprisings. I'm also curious about, having been at LMU and USC today, whether you're going to be at UCLA tomorrow.
That's, wow. I think it's 3 o'clock. We're going to be at UCLA tomorrow. Yes, we will be at the other university tomorrow. So a couple things. Last night we talked a lot about housing, and I raised the point that Los Angeles is an absurdity when it comes to housing. So I represent one of the poorest districts in the city, not the poorest, but one of the poorest. The land is among the cheapest land anywhere in the city, in my district. And if a school teacher who's gone to USC and accrued, I don't know, $100,000 in debt or whatever, and graduates and becomes a school teacher, that school teacher needs a subsidized apartment in order to be able to afford to live in my district. And this is to forget the rest of the city. Forget about the rest. The rest of the city, even the subsidized ones, that won't necessarily work for them. That is an absurd condition, and it causes a lot of anxiety. You will remember last night that Councilmember Rue, who represents the 4th District, had done a survey in his district. And when you do the issue surveys, you always expect either crime is number one, and if it'll be crime, then jobs. And if the economy is bad, it'll be jobs, then crime as the first issue. The first number one issue in his district that voters were concerned about was becoming homeless. He described a situation where people who were making in excess of $100,000, number one concern was about becoming homeless. Because if for some reason, and all of us know this if we think hard about it, if most of us who own homes, if we had to buy the house now in the same neighborhood that we live in, we couldn't do it. Couldn't do it, right? And if for some reason we lost our place, we lost our apartment or we lost our house, to go into this market and to get another one, it's nearly impossible. And so that continues to press, I think, put appropriate pressure on the system. I don't know, and I worry that we can't change fast enough to accommodate that. And, this it's just the kind of thing I don't think people will put up with very long. I don't know that the rage will express itself in a riot. We hope that it doesn't. But I think you will continue to hear that rage, and you will continue to hear the demand that something be done about it. The other good thing on this question is that in addition to all the things we've done to rebuild the infrastructure and to lay the basis for the future, voters also soundly rejected Measure S, which is very, very important, because what that was a building moratorium. That was a building moratorium to basically say, if you don't already live in LA, you're not going to get to live in LA going forward. And the voters said no to that. We want to create a way to build a city that can accommodate everybody who wants to be here, participate, and help us build it.
Let's thank Marqueece Harris-Dawson. And I just want to say that the problem with doing such a good job is that next time I'm going to put more weight. Let's give him a big round of applause again.